Okay, good evening, good morning, bro. How are you?
I'm okay. Medyo pagod. Ang daming klaseng tinuturo. Pero it's fun naman. Ikaw, kumusta?
I know. Didn't you guys have vacations? Halloween and all that. Didn't you get some respite?
Walang vacation for Halloween. Yung next vacation, malapit na yung Thanksgiving. At the
Oh yeah, the
US,
American.
Thanksgiving is bigger than Christmas eh.
Yeah.
Pero bro, how are you? Like, I like shirt. May meaning ata na.
No. I mean, here in the Philippines, naman we have syempre we had a long holidays, etc. So I made the most out of it to catch up on what's happening in Brazil. Before my classes all start later this week, no? Sorry, actually, nag-cut ka ng konti, bro. Pwede mo ulitin yung tanong mo?
Ang tanong ko, ang ganda ng shirt mo. May meaning ba yan?
Yeah. Thank you. No, kahapon actually, I was doing my vlog on Brazil. Hindi ko mahanap yung Brazil ko. Nahanap ko yung Argentina ko. So my only was I wanted to be neutral. And then I realized that was really harsh because Argentina is the #1 rival of Brazil. And I'm rooting for Brazil in World Cup, of course, which is going to start later this month. So I'm very excited and really, yun, go Brazil, di ba mga brown power tayo. Brazil then Argentina. That's really my preference for championship. Do you watch football, by the way, bro?
No, I don't. I guess I'm hopelessly Filipino and American in that sense.
Yeah, I mean,
I
you
don't
didn't
even call it
improve by
football, I
going to
call
the
it
US.
soccer, you know.
Yeah.
But I join you parang because in spirit, parang there's a kind of Viva Brazil spirit now that's been kindled among progressives and left liberals. And it's largely because of one man who toppled the tatay of Brazil, the closest analog to tatay in the world, I think.
Yeah.
Jair Bolsonaro.
Yeah.
Si Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, and you wrote an article about this victory. Ang bilis mo, you were able to write about it kagad. And what I find interesting is that article mo about Lula's win in Brazil comes at the heels of another article where you talked about the opposition in the Philippines. And so parang may atang nag-emerge na tema sa writings at sa podcast mo recently, which is you're really concerned about left liberal / progressive opposition to populism, right? And you think that Brazil is one place we can learn from as we rebuild the opposition in the Philippines. Can you just rehearse your thoughts for me, bro?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. For putting pressure on me, Lele, on this front.
No, I enjoyed the two articles and the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, of course, earlier this year, I think 5 months ago, if I let me say, I also wrote something on the Pink Tide 2.0, no, in Latin America, looking at the cases from Chile, Peru, and Colombia, right, and anticipating that Lula is gonna win later this year. To be honest, it looks like the race ended up much closer than many people.
51-49.
Yeah, like razor thin. So thank God I was just updating this morning. It looks like Bolsonaro is at least open to the transition process kicking in because he's still gonna occupy office until end of this year, right? So tanong was, is he gonna lock, the presidential palace? Anong kalokohan ang gagawin niya? So his chief of staff just confirmed a few hours ago, no? Because I'm really wondering what's gonna happen. So there's no concession speech.
Magta-turnover sila.
Yeah. So there'll be no concession speech. But there'll be that. But of course, I expect Bolsonaro, even when he's out of office by January, when the inauguration of LULA comes in, he's going to come up with his own big lie, the big lie Trump version. And my worry is, Brazil could end up much more violent and aggressive and polarized than Trump United States. Yeah.
Let's just break this down. Unang-una, who are the two? So nagkaroon ng election sa Brazil. Yun yung headline. Razor sharp yung victory ng left-wing / center-left candidate si Lula da Silva with 51% of the vote, and then yung right-wing militarist candidate na mahilig mag-rape jokes, mahilig mag-jokes about killing people, di ba? Mahilig magkarga ng barel. Hindi si Tata yun, si Jair Bolsonaro. He got 49%. So let's just break it down. Richard, who are these two candidates? Like on the one hand, sino yung incumbent? Sino nakaupo? Sino si Jair Bolsonaro? And why are we concerned about him?
Right, I think this is the first time since the return of democracy to Brazil, no, in late 1980s, that an incumbent was not able to secure re-election. No, so that's why it was still something surprising in a way. And Jair Bolsonaro was really able to pick up towards the end of the race. And by the way, I was updating on this, Lelo. It looks like there was massive voter suppression, not against Jair Bolsonaro, but against LULA, especially northern areas of Brazil, which is poorer, more LULA. And what happened there is the Highway Patrol Police Chief who openly endorsed Bolsonaro in violation.
Pero dinilit niya yung endorsement niya, pero wala na, paso na.
Wala, pasok na. And they were like putting their people there, essentially preventing, the LULA people, LULAlistas, to come in and vote for the guy. So voter suppression.
So that tells you something about this guy. So sino ba siya? I mean, like, basic muna tayo. Sino si
Jair Bolsonaro?
Jair Bolsonaro.
So Jair Bolsonaro is, depending on how you want to look at it, because chronologically came later than our other friends, you can rather look at him as the Trump of the tropics or Duterte of the Latino Duterte, right? So, sorry na lang sa kanya, nauna yung dalawa. So, the comparison goes that way, right? But obviously, Jair Bolsonaro is unique in his own right, no? On so many levels. I mean, unlike Trump, he didn't come from kind of a celebrity, glitzy background, right? He was disgraced, honorably.
Kapitan siya sa military.
Kapitan level lang, dishonorably discharged from the military in Brazil. But he always carried that kind of my military background as his rallying point when he became a relatively known but still
congressman for Rio de Janeiro.
Fringe congressman, a relatively fringe congressman. And really, it was a confluence of factors that brought him into power. That's why in one of my recent vlogs, I told people to watch a documentary at the Edge of Democracy. It's a brilliant documentary. For me, it's the gold standard of how to do a political documentary. It's a documentary by a supporter of Lula, a first-time voter when first Lula or ran for the presidency, and then it looks at how Brazil essentially falls apart. And interestingly, the book that I also recommend on Brazil the most is by Perry Anderson. It's a collection of his essays on Brazil, brilliant essays. Even my Brazilian friends were very impressed by it. Perhaps the best English language introduction to Brazilian politics. The title also is Brazil Apart, no? So if you look at the book by Perry Anderson, who's the brother of the great Benedict Anderson, who we'll talk about, and then also you look at the Edge of Democracy documentary, what it shows is that it was the collapse of the center and center left, no? Center right and center left. So center left represented by Lula, we'll talk about him shortly, and center right by the much more traditionalist Brazilian political establishment. Once that collapsed because of the corruption scandals that came out, diba? Kasi kung sa Pilipinas meron tayo nung Napoles issue, Brazil had multiple ones. There was a Mensalao corruption scandal earlier, and then there was the Operation Car Wash Petrobras corruption scandal, which affected affected every top official in every branch in Brazil. It was insane. The president, the vice president, the judiciary person, the legislature, Speaker of the House. It was insane. So many were discredited by that essentially when there was a clean slate, that's where Jair Bolsonaro came up.
So because
by default, he came up.
Everybody was so disillusioned. Naisip ko kasi Philippine comparison. Naalala mo dati yung party list na ANAD sa House of Representatives.
Right.
Sobrang right-wing, ex-military guys na ultra anti-communist, gusto patayin lahat ng komunista. Walang ginawa ko di man-red tag ng man-red tag. Every speech, kahit wala nang kinalaman dun sa topic, nang-red tag pa rin. Right. Naalala niyo, di ba yung ANAD, si Congressman si Pastor something basta it will come to me. Yun yung naiisip ko pag iniisip ko yung career ni Jair Bolsonaro sa House na
that's a very good comparison.
Isa mga pinakasiraulo dun sa House, wala kumakausap sa kanya, but then suddenly everything collapses in Brazil. Yun nga because of the major corruption scandal. And then the other thing that happens is, of course, is the crisis. Kasi Lula, yung first time ni Lula, 2003-2010, these are golden years from Brazil. Tapos biglang nagkaroon ng crisis sa Brazil, and then nagkaroon pa ng corruption scandal. Well, global naman yung crisis. Suddenly, people are desperate and they elect this person who was considered super fringe before, unelectable, siraulo. Bigla na lang siya yung presidente. But you mentioned something interesting about him. You said that he was driving Brazil to the brink of a democratic collapse. Why
Yeah.
is that? Why was this guy fundamentally threatening Brazilian democracy?
So remember, Brazil, similar to the Philippines, also followed this kind of authoritarian wave, no, in the 60s, 70s, all the way to 80s, no. So in the Philippines, we had Marcos, who we'll talk about more later on. I'm sure I'll push you more on that. In Brazil, of course, they went and had a military dictatorship, no. So Jair Bolsonaro was always not only nostalgic about the military dictatorship years in Brazil, which coincided with our martial law, more or less, but he constantly talked about why we need the military to be in charge. And he constantly was red tagging their own version, the LULA party. Because remember, the LULA, the Workers' Party of LULA, has Leninist Marxist roots, right? It's
Big
like,
siya eh.
exactly. So it's
Saka yung successor ni Lula herself, si Dilma Rousseff, she had a communist background herself, although hindi na siya komunista, pero galing siya dun sa mas hard left tradition na talagang
Mas hard
generate.
left, yeah. Because going to Lula, very shortly, of course, Lula comes from a labor union background. He's, let's say, much more social democratic than communistic, right? As far as Lula is concerned. In the case of Dilma Rousseff, she was tortured by the military dictatorship. She had horrible memories about it. She shares that in the documentary, The Age of Democracy, how she survived torture, taking it a minute by a time in order to survive it. So the thing kasi Lula, he ran 3 times for office. He was lucky at the 3rd time. So this guy ran for presidency 5 times in total, right? 2 times lost, 3rd time won, 4th time won, and now 5th time back again. No, so I mean, this is insane. I think there are very few people on earth who have done that. Medyo FDR level na ito, di ba, bro? 5 times running for presidency, 3 times successful. Now, in the case of course, Lula, he was able to rise through the ranks by leveraging his labor union background, organizing on the ground, and being a key player dun sa Party Trabajador, I think Workers' Party nila, which is not which has roots in Lenin's Marxism, but is more social democratic over time. So if you look at some very interesting books, for instance, on the transformation of the Workers' Party, they will tell you that they became more, I mean, they have been even accused of being neoliberal over time. No, even Perry Anderson, among others, have been saying that. So they softened so much. Now, I don't want to bring in the Philippine comparison because I could get into trouble, but you can imagine what I'm implying, what happened here, right? You can drop the names here, right? So, it's a parang may
pinarinig ng mga grupo, mahal ko pa rin naman yung mga grupo na yun eh.
Parang I'm very careful.
Because of the softening.
Yeah, I mean, again, the closest I can find comparison, okay, I'll drop the name is Akbayan, for instance. I think much.
Sabi ko nga, mahal ko pa rin naman yun.
Yeah, much closer ang Party Trabajador sa Akbayan kaysa, let's say, Makabayan Bloc, right? Or something like that. For folks, of course, who are not familiar with this, there's more hard left, more center left, etc. Pero I don't want to get into it.
And then just like Akbayan, there are former communists in Pique. Yeah. There are former communists in Akbayan, but these are the communists who have moderated already. Mas malambot na yung position kumpara sa position nila nung 60s and 70s. Well, okay, nandiyan na rin tayo sa discussion. Let's move on to the other candidate. So clearly the other one, like tatay of the Americas. Right, and then on the left side naman, you have Lula da Silva, who's a labor leader. What can you say about this guy naman? Of course, he was president from 2003 to 2010, but you said prior to being elected for president, tumakbo na siya ng matagal. And what I find interesting, that if I can begin talking about Lula, what I find interesting about him is yung talagang real working class background. Galing talaga mahirap. Hindi siya parang Manny Villar na nag-claim na naligo sa dagat ng basura. Talagang mahirap talaga siya. Kasi he was illiterate. For example, he was illiterate until he was 10, so hindi niya kaya magbasa until he was 10.
He only speaks one language. He doesn't speak English. He doesn't speak anything.
And then he taught himself how to read. And then in Brazil, and then of course he trabajador talaga siya at unionista talaga siya. So, and in fact, one of the things that he's identified with is, or that he's known for rather, is that he has 9 fingers. Dahil as a worker, naputol yung isa niyang daliri. So talagang manggagawa talaga yung background that never nakalimutan ni Lula yung kanyang roots in the labor movement, in the union movement. Anything else you want to add about Lula da Silva?
Yeah, so very quickly on the Silva part, I think I have to tie back slightly also to Jair Bolsonaro shortly. Now, the thing with Lula is that he was lucky the first time he won the presidency, right? Because this is the time that coincided with the so-called commodity boom. The commodity boom was so good that Brazil would be placed on the so-called list of BRICS economy. Brazil, Russia, India, China, the rising emerging market, emerging powerhouses of the world. First, it was a Goldman Sachs thing. So, but later on, it was more than just a Wall Street gimmick. No, it becomes
naging pride, naging part na rin ng Brazilian pride yun eh.
And it becomes a summit. No, so literally the leaders of BRICS country come together. Sinama na nila yung South Africa. I think now they want to bring in Saudi Arabia too. Now there's even BRICS Plus Summit hosted by China most recently. So this BRICS is no longer just an acronym by some guy, O'Neill guy in Goldman Sachs or Wall Street, but this is actually a new geopolitical bloc. In the late 2000s also, we saw Brazil emerging as a major source of development assistance, no, in Latin America, but also in Africa. So for instance, in Mozambique or some of the, or Angola or some of the former Portuguese colonies in Africa, Brazil became a major development partner player. And then also globally, Lula da Silva, for instance, was involved in pushing for an alternative nuclear deal, for instance, with Iran, in coordination with Turkey, when there were tensions between Iran and the West. No, so in fairness, Lula, was really not only trying to bring more prosperity at home. And by the way, yung 4-piece tayo na meron sa Pilipinas, yung pantawid.
Inopen natin yun. Yes. Sinotokapin natin yun from them.
Bolsa Familia. It comes from Brazil, right? So in a way, when his party came back, hindi niya kinalimutan yung kanilang roots, hindi nila kinalimutan yung kanilang constituencies, tinulungan nila yung the most indigent sectors of the society. There was massive injection of cash and assistance. The levels of improvement in Human Development Index, basic education standards, everything went well. But the thing is this, just as Lula was getting out of office, and he actually stepped down from office with a 70% approval rating, I think only Tatay Digong was able to defeat that. That's why Obama called him the most popular president in a G20 summit back in the day. He's the most popular man. It's not me, it's Lula. Like you remember, there's a video of that circulating all the time. But the thing is, just as he went down, he was stepping out, Brazil was going down. And then, of course, because of term limits, what he did was he brought Dilma Rousseff, his chief of staff, to succeed him because there was no alternative to him, right? I mean, he's such, and this is, Leloy, the problem, diba? He's such a charismatic and big figure that everyone is in his shadow. The worry today is what will come after him. Okay, he had to come back even from jail, from very difficult conditions.
Retirement, essentially.
Yeah, and the thing with Dilma Rousseff is she never had the charisma. And unfortunately, because she's the first woman in Brazil, unfortunately, there was a lot of sexism there, right? So if you look at the impeachment proceedings against Dilma Rousseff, openly, the Congressman Dilma would say, this is sexist. What you're doing to Dilma Rousseff, this is sexist. And that's where Jair Bolsonaro comes in, because Jair is the kind of a ultimate TNL, of Brazilian right-wing politics, diba? So
tsaka yung mga rape jokes niya very familiar, yung diba, you're not pretty enough to be raped by me.
Yeah, which he did to one of
the, natin kung sino yung mag-joke, diba?
Grabe, diba? Yung ginawa ni Jair Bolsonaro. And of course, the thing with Jair is, remember, Leloy, not only was he's the fringe guy who was like the only man standing when the roof came crashing down. And in fact, no less than Lula got also embroiled in the corruption scandals because he was the president when Petrobras was involved in supposed yung mga Petrobras, which is their version of their national Petronas, their national oil company, etc. Nadamay siya, although he got out of jail eventually because the accusation was that Moro, who was a former justice minister and the former so ganito, there were a bunch of telenovela-looking guys inside the Justice Ministry of Brazil. They're called the Harvard Boys. Almost all of them went to Harvard school for their masters. Ito yung mga 6 foot tall guy, macho. There are 3 or 4 of them. They went after Party Tabador. Yeah, these are the guys who went after them, and they brought down the whole house, and that led to the rise of Jair Bolsonaro. But later on, one of these guys, Moro, himself will go down because of fight with Bolsonaro, because Bolsonaro was violating some basic rules. But later on, the Supreme Court of Brazil ruled in favor of Lula, accusing these guys, these Harvard Boys guys, these telenovela-looking guys, of essentially violating basic rules and essentially having a politically motivated investigation. Kaya nga na-release si Lula. So let's be very clear, Lula has not been convicted in a finalized way as far as corruption is concerned. He was more than 500 days behind the bars, but there was procedural problems with this case. So he's technically an innocent guy. There's some criminal case. That's why he could run for the presidency.
Pero sabi naman ng mga kalaban niya, natanggal siya because of a technicality. There's still a possibility na actually ginawa niya yung ginawa niya. because there was widespread.
Yeah, I mean,
So
Lelo,
interesting.
yeah,
Sorry, I think you
slightly nakat. Yeah, no, I mean, Lelo, the point is, remember, we're in democracy, so you're presumed innocent until proven guilty, right? And if they want to go after Lula, let's not forget, Jair Bolsonaro oversaw one of the worst COVID-19 pandemic management or mismanagement cases on earth. And at some point, Leloy, the federal police of Brazil called the Supreme Court to charge Bolsonaro with spreading fake news.
Yeah.
Kasi mahilig siya mag-Facebook Live, no? But one thing I forgot to mention, Leloy, is political violence is also one reason Jair Bolsonaro is there. Not only because he promotes political violence and there was a lot of frustration, but remember, sinaksak siya during election time. When he ran for election 4 years ago, right? Was it 5 years ago? Sorry. Sinaksak siya ng isang kabila. So he survived that. And by surviving an assassination attempt, he became essentially like a martyr, right? And Jair Bolsonaro is seen almost as like a messianic figure by a lot of Brazilians, including in the interior regions of Brazil, which, by the way, is like your version of deep south of United States combined with the Midwest. So he has a very, very strong constituency. So Lelo, the outcome of this election clearly shows you that Brazil is a totally divided country, almost down the middle.
Yeah,
no? 50 times,
and you know,
40 times,
he Bolsonaro, of course, when he was elected, he was, I forget the numbers, but he was also very popular for a while. But the difference between him and Tatay Digong is talagang tinamaan si Bolsonaro ng backlash against his COVID policy. Si Tatay Digong kasi he was able to cry, he was able to tell people na ginagawa ko lahat ng kailangan kong gawin pero wala akong magawa.
Right.
And you know, and hindi naman anti-science si Tatay Digong in certain
No,
respects.
in fairness.
He was pro-vaccination.
Over.
He tried to vaccinate.
Yeah.
And in many ways, like, ang problema sa kanya, he was too paranoid about COVID, diba? Na naging draconian na. Ito si Bolsonaro is like typical Trump person. Like, he didn't want, he wasn't sure if he was going to get vaccinated, right? He did not promote vaccination. And then he did not take the virus seriously. And that's one reason why, you know, despite the fact na magkapareho sila ni Tatay Digong ng hulmahan, pareho sila ng personality, si Tatay Digong remained popular for other reasons, of course. And si Bolsonaro pabagsak din yung popularity, which actually leads you to an interesting election, Richard, diba? Because correct me if I'm wrong. This is how I'm gonna correct.
Lele, can I cut you 1 second? One similarity, though, that they had when it comes to COVID-19 management, they all militarized it. So Duterte, a lot of military officials. Bolsonaro essentially put the general as in charge of the health ministry, right? So we had Duque, they had some general guy, right? So that's the weird thing. Even when nagkakaiba na sila, may similarities pa rin eh. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
I mean, si Tatay Digong, in the case of Bolsonaro, kapitan nga siya. So maintindihan mo, may trust siya sa military. Si Tatay Digong, he likes the machismo of the military, even if he himself was not a military man. But the point I want to make is that, okay, you get to the election, you actually have candidates. Kung handler ka, hindi ideal eh, kasi yung pareho dato mo, may sabit ka eh. So, on the level of Bolsonaro, diba, you messed up COVID policy. Of course, he was also destroying the Amazon. You know, that's a big concern. That's why this election was a concern for not just Brazilians, but for the world, because the Amazon is an important forest for everyone. This is part of, you know, the patrimony of the globe. This is
the lungs of the earth.
We need this ecosystem to survive, and Bolsonaro was just allowing people to rip through businesses, to rip through the Amazon, because yung ideology ni Bolsonaro, and again, this is different from Tatay Digong, was so much more clearly market fundamentalist as compared to someone Duterte, maybe even more market fundamentalist than someone like Trump. Okay, so you have bad candidate there, and then you have Lula da Silva, who ended with his term with 70%, but then got embroiled in a corruption scandal and was open to, you know, accusation, also lots of fake news. So kung ikaw handler ka for either candidate, mahihirapan ka talaga. So hindi ka magugulat, Richard, what happened nung tumakbo sila. There was an expectation initially na kasi sa Brazil, backtrack lang tayo. Sa Brazil kasi, you can only become president kung meron kang mayorya. So nung unang round ng eleksyon, akala ng mga tao mananalo si Lula, magbobongbong siya kahit maraming kalaban, makaka 50% kaagad siya. Ang problema doon, Bolsonaro was able to run a campaign that prevented Lula from getting an absolute 50 dun sa unang balota, right? And people didn't expect Bolsonaro to do that well, di ba? Because actually sa surveys initially mababa si Bolsonaro. This is very similar to Trump. Akala ng mga survey mahina, pero mas malakas pala. So after that first election, nagkaroon ka na ngayon ng runoff election. And nung dumating yung runoff election, survey pa lang, it was very clear that it was going to be a nail-biter. Everybody knew it was going to be a nail-biter. Even if the surveys were saying may konting lamang si Lula de Silva, but I think most of the surveys were saying it was within the margin of error. So this was a really real nail-biter. Nung linggo, kabado ako. And I was like checking the news a lot because I really wanted Lula to win. What was Sunday like for you? I think that was Monday morning na for you. Were you just like paranoid?
I was always confident Lula will win. For me, the concern was, will the margin be big enough for Bolsonaro to accept it? So far, what we're seeing is essentially Bolsonaro, squaring the circle. He's not conceding, but he's open to the process of political transition kicking in because he'll be still in office until the end of this year. But even if but you can have Bolsonarismo without Bolsonaro, right? So even if Bolsonaro, may chismis ngayon na yung wife ni Bolsonaro na bagong wife lata niya at siya ay nag-unfriend na sila on Instagram. So there are all of these jokes na, I don't want to go there. Let's just move forward. Okay. I will skip that. Okay.
So nabanggit mo Trump siya / Bongbong Marcos 2016, di ba?
Yeah.
Bago pa lang dumating yung election, sinabi na niya, dadayain tayo.
Yeah. So,
at saka sabi niya, luto yung election dahil sa mga machine. This is a common trope now, yung parang dahil digital yung election, madaling dayain ng mga kalaban ko, di ba? Ginawa yan ni Bongbong noong 2016, ginawa yan ni Trump nitong 2020, at ginawa yan ulit ni Bolsonaro ngayong 2022.
Ginagawa rin ng opposition sa Pilipinas, questioning, sabi niya, pragmatic lang yan. I mean, let's be honest about things, right? Like, sometimes like, you're sounding like Bolsonaro, right?
Oh, yeah. Well,
like as I mentioned, of course, voter suppression was a big problem for the not Bolsonaro side, but for Lula side, whose voters tend to be poorer, come from rural areas. And we had certain branches of the state, including the highway patrol in the northern parts of Brazil, actively blocking the streets. Yeah, picking up people for whatever traffic violations, whatever. Openly nag-endorse kay Bolsonaro yung head ng highway patrol in the northern. So one reason maybe close to voter suppression. Yeah.
Stupid yun nag-endorse ka kay Bolsonaro tapos ikaw yung highway patrol tapos sinasabi ng mga tao na bias yung policy mo against Lula de Silva. Tatanggalin mo yung post mo na endorse mo si Bolsonaro.
Too late, man. There's something called screenshot. Yeah. Medyo wala siyang idea ng screenshot. Medyo old tech yata si Kuya. Di ba? Wala akong sinabi. Mahirap yan, bro. Mahirap yan.
So, so yun, kaya ka rin kinakaba. I mean, kahit mukhang mananalo na
mananalo talaga si Lula, pero
kakabahan ka kasi
office.
Nakaupo si Bolsonaro at saka sabi niya dadayain siya.
Yeah.
Meron siyang statement prior to the election, this election can only have 3 results. Either mamatay ako, arestuin ako, or maging presidente ako. Di ba? Nakakatakot yun. Meaning hindi siya susuko talaga. At least
just to be fair to Jair Bolsonaro, dun sa last presidential debate nila, which was very heated, di ba? Remember, you think Philippines...
sasapakan na sila.
Actually, remember, do you think Philippines has fake news problem? My goodness, you should have seen what happened in Brazil, right? Their accusation of cannibalism, Satanism, oh my goodness. 70% of Brazilians said fake news disinformation is a big problem. They had to suspend Telegram in March, yung election authorities of Brazil, because the fake news distribution was all over the place. And sabi nga, if you look at the Ipsos index, Brazil is worse than the Philippines when it comes to misinformation, misperception problem on public policy. Kaya sabi ko, mahalaga tignan yung Brazil because whatever yung issue natin sa misinformation, disinformation is way worse there. Nonetheless, ito even though dun sa debate, Lula called Jair the king of fake news. I mean, I was hoping if LENI and Marcos had a head-to-head debate, anong mangyari, di ba? But going back to this, in fairness kay Jair Bolsonaro, dun sa last debate niya, if I'm not mistaken, said something like, in the end, who gets the most is gonna win. Something like that. So may konting concession na siya towards the end. So I'm not also totally surprised that reluctantly is at least letting the transition process to go in. Yeah. But again,
and that's also because to be fair to Brazil, it has decent enough institutions to withstand a possible challenge from Bolsonaro, because the courts and the military look like they want the election, the will of the people to be followed. Nevertheless, parang as with the US, because the institutions naman in the US survived Trump, and as in the Philippines, just the fact that you have like a very high official casting doubt or casting aspersions on the electoral system
president
is already scary, because democracies are of course built on trust. And then of course yung nakakatawa diyan, 'di ba, sabi ni yung mga Trumpist naman sa US nakisawsaw pa. I think Steve Bannon was tweeting things like wag kang mag-concede, Bolsonaro, ganyan.
Exactly.
Nakakatakot kasi nag-aalign na talaga
solidarity. So in the same way that Lula was getting solidarity from other so-called pink tide, pink wave, leaders, Gustavo Pedro from Colombia, AMLO, Obrador in Mexico, in Peru, etc. In the same way that Lula was getting love from leftist progressives and Hollywood celebrities who care about Amazon. I think Leonardo DiCaprio is obviously there. Paring Jair was also getting a lot of love from, I don't know, Fox News, but perhaps Newsmax and Steve Bannon and the whole ilk, no? So let's see what's going on there, because increasingly, Lelo, if you look at the far right movement in Brazil, the intellectuals involved there, the influencers involved there, the similarities with the American far right is very, very similar. And of course, remember what makes Brazil very explosive compared even to Philippines, and it's very similar to US, is the racial element, right? The race element is very strong in Brazil, Unlike the Philippines, lahat ay Asiano. There, you literally have, Bolsonaro is Italian, right? By descent, right? Jair Bolsonaro is Italian. He's white. You can see it, right? Like blue-eyed, green-eyed, 6'2", 6 foot tall. While of course there are a lot of Brazilians who are Afro background, or their background is indigenous, etc. So in Brazil, kasi may racial element into their politics, hindi lang inequality, which makes it so they're more unequal than Philippines by Gini coefficient. So their favelas are probably worse than Philippine squatters overall, or just as bad. And then there's a racial element. Kaya it's a tinderbox in many ways. And let's see how Lula is going to survive it. And Lula is 77 years old. Let's not forget. Right. And he had
actually, we try to think of like elections as left versus right. Like for example, LENI versus Marcos as left versus right. And then this one is left versus right. But actually, sa Philippines, hindi siya ganun kalinaw, because like Duterte is not a clear right-wing personality the way Lula da Silva is a clear right-wing personality. The same with Bongbong Marcos. Bongbong Marcos is not like, si Jair Bolsonaro is a social conservative and an economic neoliberal. Si Bongbong Marcos is actually not a social conservative, and we're not even sure what his economic policy is. Like some people, according to the Philippine left, it's neoliberal. But for them naman, every Philippine president is neoliberal. So medyo mas heterodox pa yung economics ni Marcos, because because he's not a free marketeer the way like Bolsonaro is, because of the legacy of his father, who was a criminal but was not a free marketeer. And so we can learn from them, pero sometimes yung political divisions sila are in fact neater. Mas magulo yung Pilipinas kaysa sa kanila. Kasi sa kanila neat. It's like Bolsonaro is a free marketeer, he's a social conservative, and he's a militarist. And then De Silva, Lula is the opposite of that. He's a social democrat in economics. He's not a social conservative, right? And obviously he's anti-authoritarian. But where I guess, okay, so there are definitely differences. Hindi complete analog yung Philippines and yung Brazil. Where I guess there's a similarity is, if you look at somebody like LENI and if you look at somebody like Lula, they were clearly running on anti-authoritarian, anti-dictatorship platforms, right?
Right.
And this is where your article comes in, Richard, because your article is essentially providing advice for anti-authoritarian, anti-dictatorship coalitions across the world. Because maybe Bongbong Marcos is not an authoritarian, maybe he's not an authoritarian yet, maybe he'll never be an authoritarian. But the fact is, he ran on authoritarian and authoritarian nostalgia, right? He ran on the legacy of his father. So in a sense, may similarity yung ginawa ng opposition dito at yung ginawa ng opposition sa Brazil. So, alam natin yung resulta though. talo tayo.
Yeah.
Yung opposition sa Pilipinas talo, pero yung opposition sa Brazil panalo. So where's the difference?
Yeah, I mean,
why are they so much better?
well,
Why
it
did
was
they do
close,
so
di ba?
well?
Yeah, since sabi nila Leloy na, it was close. It was 50-49, 51-49. Sabi ko, well, that's still better than 60 versus 25, right?
Yes.
Let's keep that in mind. And if Jair had 4 more years, Amazon. Good luck sa Amazon. Not the Amazon product, but Amazon, the lungs of the earth. No, hindi yung Amazon ni Bezos, di ba? So, no, I mean, going back to this, actually, Kaloy Conde from Human Rights Watch had a very interesting tweet whereby he very aggressively pushed back the comparisons. Na parang, like Lula is actually left, right? Like there's a Leninist Marxist roots to his party. He clearly has a kind of a global leftist agenda. Weirdly, he's critical of Zelensky because he's taking the Russian line that this is West versus the rest, etc. Mga weird things din about Lula, which kind of raised my eyebrows, by the way. So I'm not like 100% for Lula. The thing is just, as you said, it's a battle between anti-democracy and pro-democracy forces, right? As simple as
ganun ka basic.
Ganun ka basic lang. Like Lula may be against capitalism on certain level, but he doesn't want to change the democratic system, right? And create a dictatorship. I'm not sure Jair Bolsonaro fits into that kind of category, right? With President Duterte, right? Clearly, he was flirting with authoritarian system. Ang dami niyang beses sinabi na kailangan natin ng junta, etc. So now, yes, Bongbong Marcos is not in the same breath, but remember, Bongbong Marcos was part of a coalition that includes the other side too, right? So that's why it's really a system versus anti-system, democracy versus anti-democracy. Because if we want to play that game of conservative versus liberal, obviously it doesn't make sense even in the US, right? Because in the US, you can have Democrats who are socially socially liberal but economically conservative. Hillary Clinton, for instance, right? And then you have someone like Bernie Sanders who's liberal, radical, etc. So intersectionality wise, yes, it's always diverse, no? But let's not also forget, Leloy, that Peron, no, the first populist, true populist in the developing post-colonial world, was someone who combined right and left. He had the labor support, the military support, my fascist side, my populist side. So this is not unique. So we have had this problem of yung problema with ideological classification, which goes back to France, right? Those on the right side of the parliament were conservative, pro-Bourbon, and the left side. Now going back to the Philippines, sorry, I went there because I just wanted to make...
I understand magulo, pero alam mo, Richard, to be fair to you, I noticed in your articles, you've just been using like progressive / left liberal. It's hard to find one word for it, but I guess our listeners know what we're referring to when we talk about these opposition groups, right?
I just wanted to clarify that because si Kalikon sabi niya, you cannot talk about Leni in the same way as you talk about Lula because Leni was never really left. Like she's like center left at best, no? While Lula was quite at least left in a social democratic sense, no? If not wrong, no? But ako naman,
to be fair.
Pero ako naman, ang disagreement ko doon is the 50% that voted for Lula was obviously not left, right? Maybe 20% of that was left, but 30% was liberals, centrists, even some conservatives who didn't like Bolsonaro. So the number one lesson, and this is where I agree with my fellow UP friend, si Aris Aruga, who also does a lot in Latin America. I agree with him na coalition building, political coalitions beyond narrow, parochial, kind of cult-ish, singing to the choir kind of style of politics is really the way forward, because Lula would not have gotten the 50% plus one if he didn't appeal to centrists, liberals, others who did not fully agree with Party Trabajador, who did not share his more Marxist-Leninist kind of roots or even inclinations, or his more Putin sympathetic points of view, right?
Interesting yun.
So
sinasabi mo parang broad siya. Broad siya, Richard. Pero bro, I think meron din siyang base na talagang kaya niyang
solid.
So broad siya, meron siya mga tita, mga tito na medyo mayaman, hindi naman galing labor, pero takot sila kay Bolsonaro dahil because they love their democracy, di ba? Right. So bumoto yung kay Lula. Pero I think meron din siyang constituency na mga manggagawa o mga sobrang mahihirap na tumatanggap ng pera through Bolsa Pamilya or naiangat sa hirap through Bolsa Pamilya. And as a result, parang Lula loyalist sila from 2003 to 2010 because those were really good years for Brazil. As you said, it was a combination of Lula's policies. It was also I think global, external. right? It was a commodity boom for Brazil. Nevertheless, may mga tumatanaw ng utang ng loob kay Lula. So for me, lesson number 1 is dapat meron kang base. You try to expand, but dapat meron kang base. And again, this might be the problem of our opposition, because our opposition really doesn't have a concrete grassroots base. This kind of reformist opposition that we've had, wala siyang grassroots base. I know that a lot of the poor voted for Cory in 85, 86.
Yeah.
A lot of the poor voted for Noy Noy in 2000, in 2010. A lot of the poor even voted for GMA, right? When she was like the representative of the reformist bloc. But these votes are transitory votes. These are not votes na maaasahan mo because they're loyal to a particular party, they're loyal to a particular vision, they're loyal to a particular set of policies. That is not present, at least, let's name names, that the Liberal Party does not have that particular base. So I think one lesson that we should learn is really, Philippine parlance, maglupa, and engage people and make sure that they're base and have policies that really turn them into a base. And one way to do that, and I'm an old lefty in this regard. I believe in labor unions, Richard. I love the fact that Jair Bolsonaro is a labor union leader and can always rely on labor to support him, because he is supportive of working class people, and he is supportive of working class people getting organized. I mean, labor unions are wonderful. Of course, too much power for labor unions, then you can curtail growth. But you do need a strong labor union. Lalo na ngayon, babalik tayo dun sa pinag-usapan na, lalo na ngayon na mataas ang inflation. Diba?
Alam ko, like, I know where this is going.
Diba? Kasi, diba? You can be obsessed. You can be obsessed with inflation, and you can say, let's just get inflation down, right? And in many ways, there's no alternative to that right now, Tina. There's no alternative to that now. Kasi walang labor union na malakas. But in a situation where you create strong labor unions, and the labor unions can actually negotiate wage increases during times of inflation, because times of inflation, actually businesses are making more money. You can actually create what the IMF has called.
You really want to go down this road, Lelo, again? I completely agree with you. Okay lang. Sorry, Lelo, to cut you there. You see, what made LULA win? Lelo win also, hopefully one day. Is sustained grassroots mobilization, including with the labor unions, but also other civil society groups. No. But Lelo, this raises a bigger question. This is what I talked to Dr. Lero, among others, people who are experts in Brazil and Latin America. Is like, bakit yung civil society sa Brazil mas sustained yung kanilang mobilization, mas resilient sila. They were able to mobilize so many people as compared to here in the Philippines under Duterte. You could really see that the opposition team was not very well organized. Very few people came out. Under Jair Bolsonaro, hundreds of thousands of pro-Lula people would come out on the street. One thing what I think we kind of agree with, and I want to get your point of view, because you're going to political economy right now, no? So don't worry, I'm getting back to you, is that Brazil had sustained industrialization in ways the Philippines never had. So one reason they have a very strong labor union movement, this is very important analysis. And this is where the structural difference with the Philippines comes in. But Colombia it's not the same case. No, that's why I'm saying still there are lessons in Latin America. You see, Brazil, even under the military dictatorship, we had very good industrialization period. Kaya ang laki ng kanilang manufacturing base compared to Philippines, and kaya nga ang laki ng labor union movement. So
they have a more conventional proletariat in the sense,
which the Philippines doesn't have. We are more like precariats, no? We have a strong number of precarious proletariats. They had more steady labor unit. So that's the structural advantage Brazil has over the Philippines. And that's where I completely agree with you all, Leloy, that one way also to bring democracy in the Philippines is through economics. No? So if we get the economics right, including more economic growth, more manufacturing-driven growth, we can build a more resilient civil society. Because my sense is the Philippine civil society, I'm not saying it's overrated, but it didn't show the kind of dynamism that I was expecting from it during Duterte's time. It was really, really marginalized. And we saw a lot of left na civil society. They defected even to Duterte and now even to Marcos, right? Yeah. I'm not going to name drop, but we didn't see that in we didn't see that in Brazil.
Ang kita talaga ng civil society. I mean, if you look at, there's a classic work. It's not classic. Actually, nobody reads it, but I think everybody should read it. Yung
so that's like classic.
Society by Eva Lotte Hedman. And it really
interesting.
traces the sources of the reformist middle class in the Philippines. And
Nice.
the first case study she looks at is yung 1950s election, 1953 election between Magsaysay and Quirino. And if you look at the way she describes the groups that coalesced around Magsaysay, they look exactly like the groups that coalesced around Noy, around GMA, around LENI. So essentially, yung reformist middle class na to, ang tagal na niya. Malapit na siya mag 100 years old sa Pilipinas and it still looks the same. Like, don't you realize that if you're still mobilizing, the same parang Democrat, the same Democrats from the church, certain high-heeled reformist titas, the web of NGOs you get in Quezon City and the UP Diliman area, this is essentially civil society in the Philippines, right? And this is what mobilizes for LENI. This is an old coalition, and it's a Laos coalition, and it's a small coalition, and it's been the same for almost 100 years. So if you don't expand it, talagang may talo ka talaga. You need somebody like LULA who will like actively expand the reformist / democratic coalition in the Philippines. I don't know how that's done. I mean, part of it, as you say, is that LULA is like he's a charismatic person, and maybe we just don't have a person as charismatic like him.
And Palaban, 77 years old.
Yeah.
Palaban, conviction politics. Palaban siya. I mean, dito sa Philippines, natalo lang once, parang ayun na, or na-troll lang, ayun na, diba? Like, in the case of Luke, he has been dealing with horrible things for 5 decades and more, right? So yun din, yung resilience, no? That's very important for political resilience, also is important. But speaking of this, there's another big structural difference with the Philippines. So I'm kind of pushing back against my own comparison, no? Is that you see in Latin America, they have runoff elections. Why are runoff elections important? My take on this is different from other people, because Bongbong Marcos didn't even need a runoff to win. And my suspicion is if it were Mar and Duterte would have still won the runoff elections. Maybe not with Grace Po. So I'm not arguing in that way.
Yeah, and then if it were Noy and Erap, Noy would have won.
So my point is different. My point is just the very presence of a runoff elections, it encourages a culture of coalition building. Because you know that if ever you don't get the 50% in the first round, kailangan mo yung kabila. So you cannot burn bridges the way you do in the Philippines. In the Philippines, I just need to get more votes than everyone else. So kanya-kanyang kulto na yan. Diba? Yan ang problema. Cancel culture, canceling each other. So you don't develop a coalition building culture with our single round first past the post ridiculously, Ilocano. I mean, like in a very, I won't say stingy, but economized system na, ay mahalang runoff elections, right? I really have a big problem with it because runoff elections for me are healthy for democracy. They matter. They build they build culture of coalition building.
I think so too. And the other thing is we prognosticate and we say Noynoy would have probably won against ERAP.
But not more.
Duterte would have probably won against Mar. Pero parang, what do we know, right? I mean, that's the point of runoff elections. The fact that this new round allows people to design their campaign in a new way also, and to introduce new rhetoric that is already based on new assumptions that emerge after an initial ballot, because you're no longer just running against 3 people, you're only running against 1 person, so you can tailor your campaign agenda to that campaign. And I think that's very interesting, and then that actually makes it a lot more issue-based. Kasi kung 5 yung kalaban mo, tapos naghahalo-halo, nag-i-intersect yung opinion, it's actually very hard to have a policy debate. Kaya ang gulo ng mga debates sa presidential level. Pag one-on-one na yan, ang daming nakla-clarify, I think, na differences.
But by the way, bro, in defense of
some of the benefits of a parliamentary system.
Sorry. Database yung claim natin, di ba? Because we're looking at the second preference in the Pulse Asia survey, among others. So kung sinama yung first preference and second preference, because your assumption is those who had Duterte as second preference will vote for him in a round of elections, right? And so on and so forth. Yun yung argument natin. But I absolutely agree with you that you can still turn things around when you have a chance for round of elections, especially when one-on-one na yung debate. Kasi sa first round, medyo may pagkasaling pusa, di ba? But in the second round, you'll have closer.
Atuhan ng tayo at all directions yun eh.
Exactly. But in the second round, it's much more focused. So yes, there's a chance for you to turn things around. I agree with you. But I'm just saying, my argument that Duterte would still have defeated Mar is based on the first and second preference put together. But my sense is if Grace made it, I think Grace could have beaten Duterte. Again, based on the numbers we saw, because I really doubt someone who wanted Duterte and Grace will vote for Mar in the second round. I really doubt qualitatively.
Yun din naman yung paniniwala ko in general. But yeah, there's no use really thinking. Hindi naman, we don't have a time machine. But yeah, so that's one thing. And then anything else that the opposition can learn from Brazil?
No, bro, I wanna hear from you, because okay, I don't want to put you on the spot, but let's be honest about this, bro. Like, ito na, okay, bardagulan. No. I mean, how do you feel about this whole discourse of just blaming it on disinformation? Hearing some people even blaming the voters for what's happening. I mean, and then all of this, like, everything Marcos Jr. does is wrong. Like, I mean, like, come on, man. Sometimes the guy maybe needs to be given some credit, right? I'm not pro Marcos, but come on, the guy got some things right that Duterte did not get right. Kaya nga marami kong mga pro Marcos people na supporters na anti-Duterte. Weird, basta may mga weird akong mga followers eh. But that's my point. Like, I'm not very sure, Leloy, this is gonna help the Philippine opposition, liberal left, whatever you want to call it, for the foreseeable future. And I don't also see, Leloy, a culture of reaching across the aisle. I'm talking about liberals and real progressives, right? Like, there's a snobbishness with one side, and then there's a kind of an ideological, moral snobbishness on the other side, right? So one side says, mga ano lang yan, mga neoliberal lang. Yung kabila naman, mga masyadong left yan, hindi mananalo yan. You know, I'll just be brutally honest. So, and then I look at LULA, I look at Latin America, I look at Cusao Pedro, I look at many similar countries to us. Bad information problems, bad trapo politics, but still they could work it together. They could put it together. I mean, I remember in the case of Chile, in the runoff elections, the guy who's almost our age, he's now the president of Chile, former student activist. He had to adjust his taxation policies, for instance, for the second round, so that he can get the conservative liberals to vote for him. Right? That's why he was able to beat the pro-Pinochet candidate in second round. Like, that's how specific their compromise was. I'm even willing to change my progressive taxation plan a bit, not compromise totally your convictions, but openness coalition building. Because I was following the, like, anong gagawin niya ngayon to get the 50%? Kasi in Chile, 24-26% lang yung first round, yung number 1 and number 2. Then nag-jump to 50% plus 1. Where did you get twice more votes, right? It's because you were able to adjust, you were able to reach across the aisle. That's what I don't see in the Philippines, right? Again, I know I'm going to be bashed on this, but I don't care. I mean, look at the dynamics between supporters of LENI and Isko, right? The way they wanted to cancel Isko. Because the reality is, yes, Isko had pro Duterte, whatever thing to him. I agree with that. Isko. But Isko was kind of an alternative to Marcos too, right? In a sense, no? So, and yet the way there were the attacks on Isko, etc., the cancel culture against Isko, I'm not sure that helped the opposition, or supposedly liberal, progressive, genuine opposition in any sense of the word. You get what I'm saying? So sorry, I'm getting this out because I think we need to talk about this.
Ipurga mo na pare kasi marami rin akong kailangan ipurga eh. Pero
sige lang, ilabas mo na.
Well, it's very well about reaching across the aisle. I don't think a lot of that happened in Brazil. Actually, this was a nasty election. There were moments na parang mukha na raw magsusutukan tong dalawang kandidato na to. So I think in that sense they're kind of similar to us, like really polarized, and it was a really nasty election, similar to the kind of trolling that we see in the Philippines. So maybe in that sense, they're not so much better than us. But where the Brazil opposite, and where I totally agree with you, is on the disinformation issue. Because a lot of people say that the only reason Marcos lost is because of disinformation. The opposition had nothing to do with it, right? It was only because Marcos was lying. And I will never discount information. And I will never stop saying that the people who uncover this information, like Maria Ressa, are heroes. I'll never stop saying that. Yeah, that's my opinion from day one. But if we only focus on disinformation, and that's the key word, right? Only focusing on disinformation, we exonerate ourselves and we exonerate the opposition from any blame. It's like, disinformation pala eh. We couldn't have done something.
So wala tayong magawa dyan. Too late na.
But Brazil actually proves that you can do something despite disinformation. I mean, partida. And there were so many things going against Lula. You said voter suppression. Meron siyang kaso, di ba? Meron siyang
Yeah.
corruption case. Tapos, ang lakas pa ng disinformation machinery ni Bolsonaro, he lies just as well as Trump.
Congenial liar.
And yet nanalo pa rin yung opposition, which just tells you there's a way to beat this, short of shutting down Facebook or Twitter or TikTok. You know, there's a way to do it. Right. It may be really difficult, but there's a way to do it.
And what about by the way, when I said reaching across the aisle, I'm talking about within the anti-Bolsonaro camp. Not Bolsonaro. That's not gonna happen. I'm talking about like liberals and conservatives who voted for Bolsonaro in the second round, right? That's why you got the 50% one. Obviously, no, there's gonna be no reaching aisle in that sense. But I hope they, in fairness naman to Lula, when he gave his speech, victory speech, he said, I'm the president of all the 200 million plus Brazilians, not only the 60 million.
Yeah, but everybody, I mean, that's kind of.
But everyone says that. But my point, because is when I say across the aisle, I'm talking about like Calyodi supporters, LENI supporters, even some ISCO supporters, is it like reaching out to each other, creating a common front? I didn't see that happening in the last elections. I'll be brutally honest about it, especially on some sides, no? Although in France,
you tried, kayo ni Mark, you had somebody who was more LENI inclined and somebody who was part of the ISCO campaign, hashing it out every week.
I
think you can do the job of reaching across the aisle. But I think at this point, like the opposition has to go to it, has to reach across the aisle. These are not necessarily lessons we get from Brazil. Some of it we do. And three, of course, we have to acknowledge that may mga nagagawang tama yung Marcos regime. May mga nagagawang tama yung Duterte regime. Because if we just say that everything they do is bad and everything they do leads to economic crisis, the degradation of our political system, di ma-reinforce lang natin yung sinasabi ng trolls na bias kayo at unreasonable kayo.
Tsaka bitter.
And for me, like, kunwari sa Duterte, ano ba naman yung sabihin mo na may punto yung tax reform project ni Duterte? Like, okay, you may not agree with it, but the way people have represented the Duterte tax reform program is that I've seen people compare to the war on drugs. Ganun ka sinister for them in tax. Come on, guys, it's tax reform. It's not the war on drugs. You can disagree with it, but it's not the most monstrous thing ever. And there was an article in Business World that compared it to the war on drugs. Hindi ko na sasabihin kung sino, but went to that dilawan extreme. We can't do that, right? And we can't just say na parang palpak lagi yung Marcos regime when, to be honest, like, the cabinet is by and large competent, right? I mean, the guy was elected based on lies. The guy was elected based on authoritarian nostalgia. He is a spoiled brat. He doesn't deserve to be president. But surely you can admit that a lot of the people, lalo na in the economic cluster, are smart and are there because they want to engage in public service. Some of the people there even voted for LENI. And for you to not be able to acknowledge na magagaling yung mga yon, is I think like parang wala, game over na tayo, wala na tayong pag-asa because like we're so unreasonable already. Or yung mga statements na, ito yung hate ko, Richard, bumagsak ang piso. Blame the 31 million who voted for Bongbong Marcos dahil bumagsak ang piso.
Yung mga ganun.
Bakit bumagsak yung piso? Hindi yung US Fed. Ganun na kayo katamad mag-aral. Ganun na kayo katamad. Ganun na kayo galit sa opposition, sa kalaban nyo. At ganun na kayo ka-elitista that you're going to blame 31 million voters for the inflation and for the decline of the peso. Come on, like that's not the way the world works. That's sour grapes, like sour grapes.
And as I wrote the Lelo, I think some folks owe an apology to very good friends of ours, people like Ronald Holmes, like legit social scientists, people who are doing the job. The shooting the messenger thing, I think, was also very unhelpful. All of these attacks on people in the survey agencies, including one legit survey agencies, that was very, very nasty, very, very nasty. And I think it undermined the moral legitimacy of a lot of people. Again, we're not gonna name names, pero alam nila kung sino sila. Marami din dyan mga Google Trends people.
At saka kung if you're against this information, then peddle good information, right?
Not your own disinformation or like...
mananalo si LENI dahil sa random data on Facebook and Google eh. Yeah. And then afterwards, nung halatang nagkamali ka, wala kang accountability, yun yung isa pa.
Yes, walang accountability. Yeah.
Umami naman kayo na nagkamali
Yung
kayo.
culpa,
Pagbigyan naman ako nagkakamali ako all the time. Right? I misphrased the central bank mandate. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I used to support Chavez. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I used to think that ang dami ko ng mali. There was this one time where I thought the labor movement was relatively weak in 1920s, and I forgot that Isabelo de los Reyes was already organizing at that time. Mali ako. I'm sorry. Hindi, like I could rattle off like 20 times I've gotten wrong, and I just say sorry, and then I'm not perfect, and neither are the people who talked about Google Trends and then blamed Ronnie Holmes for being pro Marcos. Obviously, mali na kayo ngayon. Umami naman kayo na mali kayo.
Wala, I don't see that.
Wala. Diba? Mayroon ba kayong
I see them hating us. People like us pointing this out. Like, hey, maybe, diba? Medyo konting hiya, diba? That's a problem. But I want to just say as a closing note, because I know you're very tired. It's getting late there. Not as late as when
natin. Sumisingaw na, pare.
Yeah, I could see that. Ako, Lelo, ganito. I don't like hearing this. Oh, if we were in Norway or New Zealand, like LENI would have won. But we're not in Norway and New Zealand. We'll not be there in the next century, probably. But we are in a place quite similar to where Colombia, Peru, Chile, Mexico, Brazil, a lot of these countries have been. And there, in spite of everything, progressives are doing way better than how they're doing in the Philippines. / quote-unquote progressive, left liberal, whatever you want to call it. So my point is, maybe Filipinos, we should stop looking at Norway, New Zealand, or US to draw inspiration. As much as I love what Stacey Abrams did, for instance, in Georgia, I get a lot of inspiration from her mobilization over a decade. I think the Filipinos, we have to pay more attention to our peers, actual peers, and a lot of them are actually in Latin America, not in the West, right? So medyo babawain din natin yung pretentiousness natin. Yun ang sinasabi ko rin doon. No? That's why I'm very obsessed with the Latin America project, because I see them way more, as a laboratory of experimentation, way more relevant for us than a lot of our neighbors. I think South Korea, Taiwan are totally different from the Philippines. They have Confucian values, background, totally different political economy, developmental state. Latin America is more similar to the Philippines. Inequality, the Spanish, Brazilian, Iberian colonial structures. So yun talaga for me. That's where I'm coming from, Lelo. That's why I'm very obsessed about what's going on in Brazil, etc. But obviously, I'm not an expert. So I saw this annoying post by some political scientists like, oh, but tayo nagko-comment and hindi naman tayo expert dyan. Like, why do you need to have a PhD in Latin American stuff? Like, that's what I hate about a lot. And the word hate is bad. But that's what really disappoints me, is the parochialism of a lot of our academics, intellectuals. They just want to stick to one thing. And the funny thing, Lelo, is the one thing they stick to, they're usually not good in it. Right?
Oh my God.
Because if you don't compare, you really don't know what you're talking about. So the funny thing is, like, I see people say, I'll just stick to this na lang kasi ito talaga expertise ka. And sabi ko, yun na nga lang, di mo matamaan. Philippine politics na nga lang, hindi tama analysis nyo eh. Kaya nga katulad namin ng mga makapalang mukha nagpa-publish on, Journal of Democracy, etc. Because we dare to compare and learn lessons. Kayo, hanggang dyan lang, di ba? Kasi you don't want to learn. So I hope we get also out of intellectual parochialism or snobbishness vis-a-vis Latin America.
Brad!
Eto na. Ito yung fun part, bro. This is the trivia part of our podcast. Diba?
Sige, pare. Isa rin na natin. Yeah. I want to go back to the same.
I know. Yeah, I think we should close it now.
Let's lighten this up. What have you been thinking about this week na hindi Brazil?
I'm checking if I should take whey protein na ulit. So yung mga ganun na lang. Hanggang kanina umaga, yung mga friends ko, like, okay ba yung whey protein? Anong version ang kukunin ko? Kasi I used to have whey protein, but I didn't take because of worries about effect on your kidney, liver. Ganun. So medyo ganun ang mga problema ko. Medyo mababa. Yeah.
Siyempre, tumatanda na ng konti, di ba? Kasi after 35,
it doesn't burn the same way.
Kailangan i-preserve mo na yung muscle mo.
Build muscle, exactly. So, mga ganyan ang mga issue natin, bro. Kanina umaga. Like, ano bang, yung ISO, yung gano'n, kasi 3 versions yung whey protein niya. So, ikaw, bro, what to lighten up the topic?
Well, parang naman tayo. Meron akong I consulted someone, a nutritionist, na tinignan niya yung diet ko. Sabi nga niya, after 35, you have to really just have more protein dahil mas madali nang kainin yung muscle mo as you age. So yeah, I've also been thinking about whey protein. Pero just what I've been thinking about this week is I teach a popular culture class in the Philippines.
Oh, wow.
And this week, I've been thinking about a movie, and it's so interesting because sa popular culture class, pinapanood ko sa mga estudyante ko yung film na Mano Po. Remember that?
I haven't watched, but I know the Chinese
And
one.
it's really the first attempt to represent Chinoy life in film. But what I find really interesting about Mano Po is walang Chinoy sa Mano Po. They're like Chinese passing or Chinese mestizo, like
He's Aquino, di ba?
Christina, di ba? Pero hindi siya Chinoy. Like, she's not Hokkien speaking. She doesn't come from, she doesn't have a Chinese last name.
Benedict Anderson said they come from Fujian, right?
Yeah. But you know, the nice thing is like, and I think napagtanto ko, the reason why there were no Chinoy actors at that time coming out in Mano Po is because wala pang A-lister Chinoy nung time na lumabas yung Mano Po. And this is actually a great thing because if you were to do another Chinoy film, and people do,
Kim Chu.
Ang dami mo ng real Chinoy stars today. Richard Yap, Kim Chu.
Bakit si Tim Yap?
Hindi naman actor si Tim Yap.
Pero
di ba, parang ang ganda.
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
It's a nice thing that we have real Chinoy stars now.
Exactly.
And they're no longer having to be played by Maricel Soriano.
Pilitan. Sige, pilitan. I think that's what I like about you, bro. Yung orchidaceous ka rin mag-isip and you're like all over the place. But that's my point. Being all over the place helps you to better understand where you're placed at, right? Because it's really in connection of everything. Medyo continental Europe kasing style and approach natin, which is very similar to someone both of us look up to, which is Adam Tooze. No? So I was just listening to I sent you actually the copy podcast if you have not listened to it. He was talking about why he's also like that orchidaceous, and he got it from his years in Germany, it looks like, no? When he was teaching in free university in Berlin. Yeah. Anyway, bro, I think you need to get some rest. I think I need to keep energy for the rest of the day until tonight. Thank you very much for joining me again, and thank you to myself for joining you.
Yeah, and thank you, and thanks to the audience for tuning in. Episode 2 pala to ng Nexus, marami pa kaming gagawin.
I know. So we still have a lot to talk about. No? Marami babalikan pa natin itong economics and inflation soon, and then yung issue mo ng wine, food. So there's lots to talk about. Nagkataon lang Brazil is the hot thing right now, and Brazil is obviously hot. So I always have to talk about Brazil. Fuego.
Okay.
All right. Salamat, bro.
Adios, bro. Bye.